City Council approved spending over $2 million in its latest push to keep the Chargers. Big-name Democrats are so far big-time no-shows for the 2016 mayor's race. Two prestigious universities duke it out over a major long-running study of Alzheimer's disease. And Chula Vista, the county's second-largest city, divides itself into 4 parts. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer. And joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are Michael Smolens, politics editor for the San Diego Union-Tribune. Hi, Michael.
Mark, good to be here.
Good to see you again. Gary Robbins, science and technology writer for the Union-Tribune. Hi, Gary.
Hey, Mark.
And Robert Marino of the Star News in Chula Vista. How are you today, Robert?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's good to see you back. Well, the City Council voted this week to spend $2.1 million to hustle up an environmental impact report for the stadium site in Mission Valley. The idea is to convince NFL owners that the city really wants the Chargers to stay. Mayor Kevin Faulconer and 6 of 9 council members are begging Chargers owners to reconsider snubbing their offer of hundreds of millions in public funds. But some council members are saying enough. Michael, start by telling us about this EIR. What's the point of this thing?
Well, the point is to, as you said, to convince the NFL owners that there's a serious effort down here. The Chargers, almost from the get-go, have suggested that it's all, if not a fraud, just dysfunction down here. They're trying to convince the NFL owners to allow them to go to L.A. So the EIR is something to show the NFL owners that they've got a plan to do this. They're speeding it up, and they say they can do it in time to get an election, which is the crucial thing, by January, if not December.
Well, let me ask
before the NFL opens up the period for allowing teams to apply to move.
All right. Now, let me ask you quickly about that. We talk about this January election. What are we actually voting on? I mean, it's not really up to the public whether we're going to spend this public money. It's kind of a confidence vote or something, isn't it?
Well, no. There's a lot of land use issues, and there does need to be a vote. Plus, just the political aspect. Kevin Faulconer had said from the get-go that there needs to be a vote of the people on a stadium to move forward. So there's just no way. They were talking about there's a way they could structure it without a public vote, but I think that they view that as a political catastrophe, that there would be a referendum on whatever legislation or ordinance they needed to pass. So that really was sort of a non-starter, the fact that they wouldn't have a vote.
All right, so now the Chargers have walked away from the negotiating table. It appears they are really packing for their move to this L.A. suburb of Carson already, right?
Well, it appears that way, but let's remember they still don't have any place to move. You know, there's a lot of talk about Carson. Some people are suspect that is there as much there as the Chargers say and the city of Carson says, you know, while they're saying there's not much going on here. Also that I liken this whole situation to the old Star Trek episode on the three-dimensional chess. I mean, there's things going on in St. Louis with the Rams and certainly Los Angeles, and down here in Los Angeles, the key thing is Rams owner Stan Kroenke wants to build a stadium and this huge commercial complex at Hollywood Park.
Not in Carson, obviously. It's different up in Inglewood.
Up in Inglewood at the old Hollywood Park track. And, you know, that's really driving things because he can go and build that. He's got the money, you know, in his back pocket almost. He's a billionaire. And so I think that the owners are trying to figure out how to not reel him in so much, but how to work around that, because we view the owners as the star chamber, as I've said before. But, you know, here you've got a very powerful guy who has, you know, the ability to just go and do this huge development on his own.
Mm-hmm. So, for the record, I want to say that council members Todd Gloria, Marty Emerald, and David Alvarez voted no on this $2.1 million that we were talking about with the EIR. And Marty Emerald was blunt. She said, quote, you know, what part of no do stadium boosters not understand? The Chargers aren't at the table. Is she right? Is starting to see this as a lost cause? Is Mayor Faulconer kind of on the wrong side of this now, or what?
It's a bizarre situation, Mark, that you know, you've got the city moving ahead to spend over $2 million on this EIR that the team that it's supposed to benefit wants nothing to do with, for a stadium at a site they don't want to be at. I mean, think about that for a second. I've been covering local government for probably too long, and, you know, EIRs are always something, you know, for big projects, something these cities do with developers. They coordinate. It's something the developers want. So here, in a way, it's kind of trying to force it on the Chargers. But like I said, the real political game is to try to, not to convince the Chargers, but to convince the NFL to reconsider this notion of the Chargers moving to L.A., but primarily to get the Chargers back to the negotiating table.
The time frame on this is really interesting as well. EIRs are usually a pretty lengthy process. The city's talking about doing this in 2 or 3 months, and people are questioning whether they can do a thorough, practical, fair job within that period of time. Over the years, the EIRs that I've seen tended to take longer, never shorter. So this is a very narrow window.
Robert, do you think I don't know that you cover the Chargers per se, but do you think as a casual observer of all this, what's your 50-50 odds? Chargers gone, Chargers here?
Just from what I'm digested, it sounds like the Chargers are going to be gone.
One way or another, they're not going to be playing here again.
But I had a question for Michael. Like, how much pull does the city have with the NFL owners? Because I know the NFL owners are essentially, a tight-knit group, and, they stick together usually.
Yeah, I mean, you do have the occasion where Al Davis, was the maverick and moved the Raiders against the NFL's wishes down to L.A. They want to take care of their owners. And they want to make everybody happy, and it is an unusual dynamic in that regard. But here you have potential competition in Los Angeles between a couple or three teams. They also want teams to stay in cities in a good situation. They don't want a lot of movement. They're certainly open to it, obviously. But I think that what they want to avoid, and City Attorney Jan Goldsmith kind of put his finger on it, that the city wants to show that a deal that can make the Chargers even more money can be done down here. They don't want, the NFL, in his view, doesn't want the Chargers or any team to say, well, sure, we've got a deal there, but we can make more money in L.A. That doesn't look good for the NFL. Right. So at least that's what the city's, their angle is. But what pull they have, we'll just have to see.
I wanted to segue into our discussion of mayoral politics here and what Faulkner's looking at ahead with one last question on the Chargers, and that is, at what point does the other side of this become a reality? Because it's looking like Faulkner's saying, I fought hard. If the Chargers lead, I did everything I could, tried to whip up all the enthusiasm to keep them here. But at one point, does it say the worst thing could be if they stay and you got $600 or $900 million in public funds going there? Are you the mayor who mortgaged the future?
Well, a lot of people will feel that way, but I think that the majority, we'll see how the election goes. If they get it to the ballot, that would tell you. So, I don't know that he is in political trouble on either way. Frankly, that seems to be more concerned about, being the mayor that lost the Chargers, and you don't want that. So he certainly is trying to show that he's doing everything possible, and if the Chargers walk away or the city council finally blocks him, I've done all I can.
We exhausted every
But there's been a lot of reporting in cities where teams have left that the political fallout really didn't affect the mayor or whoever was in charge that much. If they left office, it was really for other reasons.
So speaking of Faulkner's political fortunes, who's going to challenge him next year? We're not really seeing anybody stepping up and saying, choose me, and I've got a committee, and we're going gangbusters yet.
I think you, Mark. You're a familiar face. There's nobody lining up. Let's not forget, San Diego is a Democratic town. By a couple football scores, it's double digits Democratic voter registration over Republicans, a huge independent voter registration or percentage of registered voters, which I think a lot came from were disaffected Republicans. So it's not your typical, hardcore Democratic town, but it is sort of odd that you've got a Republican incumbent with not even a challenger. I think that speaks to a couple things. Mere exhaustion over politics. We've had so many elections.
Special elections.
And so many mayors, and a lot of trouble with that. And he's in office during a good time for the city. We've gone through all sorts of financial problems. City's kind of flush right now, and he's able to spend money and restore services. His budget was approved unanimously by a Democratic majority city council. And he's done a lot of good things to shore up his weaknesses. He's gone into neighborhoods that he didn't carry to try to do stuff there, and it's paid benefits in certain ways.
I'm glad you mentioned exhaustion. In listening to talk radio, a lot of different stadiums, that's the sentiment that really comes across. People are exhausted by this and the other things before it, and you feel like the announcers just want to walk away from it as well. It just seems like total exhaustion on the part of the public.
Right, and I mean, there were times where there was analysis at the time of the special election when Kevin Faulkner did get elected mayor here, that they said, well, he's going to be a short-termer because there's so many Democrats, and the Democrats are certainly going to throw somebody up here, Tony Atkins, Todd Gloria, but nobody's stepping forward.
Well, but also I don't think you can just look at the numbers, which I brought up at the beginning, or just the overwhelming Democratic voter registration majority or plurality. But, Faulkner hasn't done a bad job. I mean, look at the city's history. I mean, mayors generally, like a lot of presidents, get 2 terms unless they run into trouble. Dick Murphy resigned early because the whole pension crisis blew up underneath him. And, of course, Bob Filner and the whole scandal, sexual harassment, sexual assault scandal. Yeah. But otherwise, if people are keeping their hand on the tiller and there's not a lot of problems or controversy, they tend to get reelected, and I think people realize that, and it's just, you know, a lot of people saying, is this my best political move? And clearly we've got some powerful Democrats who just don't think that they can win.
All right, well, we'll see how that plays out. There's still plenty of time as we go. Somebody will run against them, I'm sure. Well, we're going to move on. We're used to seeing major universities square off on the athletic field, but UC San Diego is taking on the University of Southern California in a court of law. UCSD says USC is guilty of a conspiracy to poach a major Alzheimer's research team. Gary, a lawsuit of this sort, pretty rare thing, right?
This is a very rare thing. I've been talking to executives at both campuses, and no one recalls anything quite like this. But there is a difference. It's not unusual for a scientist to move to another campus and take his grants with him. But what we're talking about here is the size of the money involved. There's $55 million in federal money. There's $45 million in private money. So $100 million approximately in an Alzheimer's study that involves the entire nation and many, many sites. That's a lot of money. The University of California, San Diego doesn't want to lose that. It would be humiliating to the university if it did. And the university is concerned about clinical trials. It's not doing all the trials that are involved in this study. It's participating in some. But the university is trying to get ever deeper into biomedical research. It's already huge, but it's trying to get deeper. It has 16,000 people just here involved in clinical trials, and it wants more. So it doesn't want to lose anything that has to do with clinical research.
And tell us about this study. When was it started, and give us a little more idea about the scope of it and what it aims to do.
The study was started in 1991, and it was started under UC San Diego. So UC San Diego manages the study, so it does some of the research, but it also oversees what's done across the country at like 70 different places. So other places will be doing basic research into Alzheimer's disease. They'll be doing applied research. They'll try to develop molecules that can be turned into drugs. They will test drugs. So there's a lot of testing going on. And the profile of Alzheimer's has become ever larger over the past decade or so. So the university is managing a study that's lasted almost 25 years.
We do have a clip here from Dr. Azen, who's named in the lawsuit as well and has directed this here from UCSD TV. Let's hear what he has to say.
Alzheimer's disease is invisible in a sense. We need tools to measure the stage of disease and the progression of the disease, and the ADCS has been key to the development of such measures, biomarkers of the disease that allow us to diagnose it accurately, watch the progression, and test the impact of drugs on the biology of Alzheimer's disease, and to actually conduct studies.
What he just said goes to the heart of this entire lawsuit. He mentioned biomarkers. Scientists are looking for a way to see whether there's something, some telltale sign in the brain that can tell you way ahead of time, way before symptoms set in, that someone is going to develop Alzheimer's disease, so you can attack it early and develop drugs more. He believes that a biomarker is coming. There's a lot of faith in it, and he's done a lot of work on this. Whoever develops a biomarker is going to know untold riches, because this is something that involves intellectual property and licensing. USC wants someone like that. He has a lot of connections, a lot of collaborations. He's well known throughout the world. So I think that part of what's going on here is USC coming in and saying, we want to be a national leader in biomedical research. To do that, we need talent, we need research contracts, and we need collaborators. In order to do that, we need to extend into San Diego County, where all of those things exist. So USC was here before trying to buy or acquire the Scripps Research Institute. That didn't go over big, and it didn't happen. They've talked collaborations with Sanford Burnham. That's not going to involve control. But now they've come down here and recruited someone at the head of a study, and that person is saying, fine, I'll come with you and I'll bring the money. And UC San Diego is saying, no, you won't.
So as you noted early on, it's not unusual for researchers to move within institutions and academia and all. So what makes this kind of the accusations of the conspiracy and the poaching and, of course, the lawsuit, I mean, it seems much more acrimonious than simply a disagreement here.
Acrimony is part of this. I haven't seen this much anger in a very long time. It's very common from one prominent researcher to go to another research and just move his research. You rarely hear about it. There's no public lawsuits. But this involves so much more money than is usually involved. It involves the entire nation. It involves access to networks. It involves collaborations. So it's a much bigger deal than the average person moving from one school to another and taking, say, $2 or $3 million.
And how many researchers overall are working on this nationally? I mean, it sounds like there's scores of them.
There are at least 70 sites involved, which would involve hundreds of people, which would involve thousands of people in clinical trials. And they don't want to do anything to upset that because it's very difficult to recruit people for trials. There's a lot of reasons where it's very difficult to do that. So if you get someone in there, you don't want any legal challenges over who's organizing the study or where the results are going or where the data is going. Mm-hmm. What's blown up here is that USC said, you know, we're taking control of the data involved in the study. We're taking custody of the study. We have a right to it because Azen is the head of the study. UC San Diego is saying, well, he was the director of the study, but these grants were made to us. So it's a battle over custody and control. And right now it's kind of at a dead spot because the courts haven't ruled who, in fact, is in control.
So the information really is power in this and leverage in this instance.
Absolutely.
What is UCSD, University of California at San Diego again, what do they say was how this conspiracy worked? What was the essence of the conspiracy?
They said that months ago that Dr. Azen and maybe some of the people that he worked with and the University of Southern California began to come up with a way to take control of the study without telling anybody else. We don't know whether that's true. There was communications back and forth, and Dr. Azen has made clear that he made clear to the university that he was unhappy with the way things were going. He felt that UC San Diego was not supporting the study enough, wasn't providing enough money for him to do the administrative things needed to do to keep the study going in the right way. The university says the opposite. The chancellor told me we gave him all the money and a little bit more that he needed to do his work. So it's a disagreement over control and custody of this. What's the right path? Who owns the information?
Now, you talked to both sides this week. Does it seem like there's really some bad blood here? Are they really going at this, or is there some legal posturing going on?
The chancellor said, don't assume that there's bad blood here. And I went up to USC and talked to Michael Quick, the provost, and he said something similar. There's a conciliatory tone that both of them took. They both said, let's not make one deal ruinous to us working together. USC very much wants to come into San Diego and strike collaborations. It brings in about $180 million in NIH money, which is fine, but UC San Diego brings in $400 million. It's a much younger campus bringing in all this money. USC wants to partner with schools like that and with the Salk Institute and with Sanford Burnham, all these institutes. So it's looking for a way to kind of take control of the study in one way, but also keep a political climate going where other people don't distrust them. In fact, that's what the provost said yesterday. We don't want San Diego to feel threatened. We don't want them to think that that Los Angeles is taking over the San Diego scientific community.
Well, is it just a matter of bad PR or diplomacy here, or I mean, are they getting kind of a reputation of bigfooting some of these relationships and coming in by hook or crook and getting what they need?
USC admits that it has a lot of money, and it certainly does. It's in the middle of a $6 billion capital campaign.
A lot of money.
It's already raised more than $4 billion. When I talked to the provost, he mentioned the fact that, yes, we do have a lot of money and we need to be responsible about it. But there was a lot of resentment last year when they came and tried to buy or acquire the Scripps Research Institute. It was done in a very secretive way. There were secret negotiations going on. When the faculty at TSRI found out, they flipped out. Mm-hmm. They did it for a lot of reasons. They didn't want to give up control, but this also had to do with reputation. TSRI is considered to be one of the most elite scientific institutions in the world. The faculty there told me, we don't want to become part of the USC faculty. Mm-hmm. USC is not as prestigious at this point in time in the sciences as TSRI or UC San Diego or the Salk Institute. So there's this feeling that USC is coming in and bullying some of these institutions and trying to buy their way in. They're literally, there's some sentiment that they're literally trying to buy credibility within life science.
All right, a couple seconds left. What's the status of the lawsuit here? Where are we in the court process?
USC sought a restraining order against UC San Diego saying, oh, you guys have been hacking into the information. The judge says, no, that didn't happen. What they're going to do now is the judge is going to respond to whether a restraining order should be placed against USC to prevent it from essentially digitally touching this. If the judge comes in and says, USC, you can't do that, that's going to raise a lot of questions about whether USC, in fact, has any right to this data at all as a manager, as a study runner.
Fascinating. All right, we're going to certainly see how it plays out, and we'll watch your reporting for that. Well, an exercise in representative democracy is playing out in the South Bay city of Chula Vista. Voters in the county's second largest city okayed a plan 3 years ago to divide the city into 4 council districts, with the leaders chosen by residents of those districts. This week, the new district boundaries were set. And Robert, start by telling us how the council was elected before and what's going to change now.
Well, the city of Chula Vista is a charter city, so before they had their elections at large, meaning that the top vote getters in the council race got elected on to the city council.
From wherever they lived. They could all live in one section of town.
Exactly.
They could all live in Eastlake. Yeah.
Correct. Correct. But now, the game has changed with the districting elections that voters passed with Prop B in 2012, as you mentioned, and it's a change in the charter now, as opposed to, electing elected officials all over the town. Mm-hmm. You're just confined to one certain area of voting.
So you've got to live in you got to live in District 1 or live in District 3 in order to run and be elected from that district.
Correct,
now.
And you can also move into a district as that's, add more major problems to it, but that is how it works.
So what the advantage to voters then, I mean, the idea is that you're going to have folks who live there, work there, they drive the roads you do, they shop in the stores that you do, they know your problems in that particular part.
Yes, I mean, if you have representatives living just on one side of the city, they have no idea that roads are cracked on say hypothetically the west side, or they have no idea that the west side has a homeless issue or there's torn rundown buildings. Whereas if you have representatives sitting on the city council on, say, just on the west side of the district, they know those problems. Like as you said, they drive those roads, they see those rundown buildings, and they see the homelessness people standing out there every day. So
they'll speak up for them. What about the mayor? He's still elected at large, he or she?
Yeah, the mayor and the city attorney are still elected at large, meaning they can live wherever they like, and voters can, and all voters in all districts can elect.
All right. Now, let's get into the process a little bit for choosing these district boundaries. That seems where the famous devils and the details come to meet. How did it go? What were the concerns? You've got the older western side of Chula Vista, and they had felt shortchanged politically over the years, the new upstart and the money in the affluent developments, Eastlake and the east side, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, a districting commission was basically assigned the task, a 7-member commission assigned the task to formulate the lines based on census data and also based on public testimony, and through they came up with a proposed map. Then they had to modify it after more public input, and that's how they came up with this current map.
Okay, so they relied heavily. They really wanted the public voices to come in.
Yes,
okay.
There were 2 separate groups. There was a Asian Pacific Islander group, as well as a Southwest Civic Association who spoke for the Southwest, and then you had another group that represented labor and a lot of Latino voters as well, and all 3 were relatively divided at one point, but eventually they agreed to this map.
Now, was it fairly acrimonious as we went along here? Did it get ugly at times or heated?
Well, not as ugly as the Chargers in the city of San Diego issue, but yes, at times everybody wants their slice of the pie, and when you're talking about neighborhoods, I know the API community in particular, they wanted their community intact. They wanted the Asian businesses, restaurants, grocery stores intact, and they didn't want it to be divided. While the other groups felt like, well, the Asian community is just thinking about themselves and not thinking about the whole city
at large.
At large, yeah.
Okay. And well, give us a sense overall. I know there's a lot of breakdowns, a lot of numbers and specifics, but give us a sense of the breakdown of the voters. I see from your story nearly 100,000 are registered. How many Democrats, how many Republicans?
41% are Democrats, 27 are Republican, and right now the current city council is majority is Democrat as we speak.
Okay, that's kind of the breakdown in San Diego, right?
5-4 majority in San Diego.
And didn't we go through something like this in recent years in San Diego, where you went from at large and you went to districts, and there were a lot of the fighting?
That was a while ago, and that was a big fight. It was kind of interesting because then the Democrats really wanted the district elections because in the past, the primaries were in the districts, but then you ran citywide in the runoff, and the Republicans had the money really and the structure back then. The Democrats wanted more neighborhood grassroots organizing, which they were better at then. Now we know how powerful labor has become, and they can certainly run citywide campaigns. But what I think is the most interesting dynamic here, and what happened in San Diego, because remember, we added a 9th council district along with some other reforms, is just the rise in the desire to carve out an Asian Pacific Islander district. That's relatively new. On the San Diego City Council, there'd always been sort of a Latino district that usually was represented by a Latino. Now, often there's more than one, and one for African Americans. It's not quite that carved up, but to a degree. And in the redistricting and that added council seat, there was a strong push to make it an Asian Pacific Islander seat, and you've got Chris Cate now representing it, who is of that ethnic background. All
right, short time left here, Robert, on this topic. Asian Americans had not been very active politically, but your story says that's changing, and that they're getting more engaged with it.
Yes, now that they're separated into districts, they want to see the first Filipino elected councilman or woman on the dais now for the first time. So they're making a big push for that, and there's been a lot of public testimony about that.
All right, and that is going to wrap us up, and we'll have to watch and see how that all plays out in the 2016 election. That does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Michael Smolens of the San Diego Union Tribune, Gary Robbins, also with the Union Tribune, and Robert Moreno of the Star News in Chula Vista. A reminder, all of the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.